What is up, guys? It is I, the Rambling Collector, back here with another book ramble for all of you today. And this one is very special to me, as recently I have gotten my hands on and have completely read the novelization of my absolute favorite anime film. It was actually one of the first anime films that I remembered watching, and it still stands proudly in my collection today. Today, I'm going to be talking about the novelization of Wolfchildren by Mamoru Hosoda. With all that said, let's get into it, shall we? So to start off with, the plot of Wolfchildren is actually fairly simple. For those of you who have seen the movie or have gotten your hands on this book yourself, you all know the story. A young woman named Hana meets and falls in love with a young man named Ukami, whom actually has the ability to turn into a wolf. Now the reason why he's called Ukami is simple because, well, he's a wolf man. And though he was not given an official name, the more well-known name for him is usually Ukami. However, during this time, Hana and Ukami fall in love and wind up having 2 children together, but tragedy strikes when Ukami sadly dies shortly after their son Ame is born. So with that, Hana is forced to struggle with being a single mother to 2 children, Yuki and Ame, who both have the ability to turn into wolves just like their father. Now living in the big city, at first she had to keep that secret to herself because there was no one she could go to. She didn't know whether she could go to a doctor or a veterinarian because they were both human and wolf. And with that constant fear of the secret being discovered, she ends up deciding to move out to the open country to essentially give her children the chance to decide whether they want to be people or wolves. Which is honestly the big question for these kids as they're growing up. And I gotta tell you guys, as I was reading this, which by the way, it is a very short book, only rounding out at about 169 pages, I knew the plot. But the thing I liked about this is that this gives us the first-person perspective of Hana as well as Yuki and Ame. It gives us that perspective of what's going through their heads as we read the book, which, in all honesty, the movie is fantastic, but it approaches it from a third-person perspective. So we never really get inside the minds of these 3. And with this book, we actually do, and we see how Hana is constantly wondering what she is meant to do. Like, what can she do to help out her children? Like, she's walking in blind, and she has to raise these 2 by herself. Which I gotta say, this Hana is a great example of a dedicated mother. She didn't give up on her kids. She didn't fall into despair when Ukami died. She just mommed up and went ahead and raised her 2 kids, did the best she could, and honestly, she is one of the best characters that I've seen in an animated film. Hands down. Not to mention, watching Yuki and Ame as little kids is honestly freaking adorable. Like, if you do not grin or smile at all watching these 2, I'm sorry. I don't know what the heck's wrong with you. But, to put it simply, we watch as Hana watches Yuki and Ame grow up, and essentially choosing their paths and how they want to go throughout their lives. But, to continue this review, I just want to go over some of the highlights that I absolutely love about both the book and the film. So, let's talk about some of the highlights, shall we? So first of all, Hana and the Wolfman's relationship is just one of the purest things I've ever seen. Like, it is literally the cliche trope of love at first sight, but it's done so spectacularly that you can't even get mad about the clichéness of it. Seriously, like, you watch these 2 as they live together, they grow to love each other, they grow out on dates, and honestly, it's just pure watching these 2, especially when they become new parents. You can see the smiles on their faces, and it is just absolutely pure. Every time I watch that sequence in the film, I'm constantly wondering, will I ever have a future like that? And if you are a married couple and you've seen this film, I'm pretty sure you can relate a lot to this. There's always the ups and downs, but this relationship is just pure to watch. It is just pure fluff. No pun intended. And honestly, I like the fact that she was so accepting of the fact that he was a wolf man. Like, she knew he was different, but she just accepted all of him. And I honestly love that. I love it so much. And watching these two grow and just that surprise of finding out that Hana was pregnant, what does the guy do? He runs down the street, gets off of work, runs down the street towards her, and just embraces her wholeheartedly in absolute happiness. Once again, these two are like couple goals. They were a married couple despite the fact that they never once tied the knot, which I think is honestly wholesome as hell. But this is just one big highlight, and I still love watching this. Every time I watch the movie, I just smile seeing these two. But not just these two. So first of all, another big highlight, the relationship between Hana, Yuki, and Ame. Just a proud single mom taking care of her two kids, and watching Yuki and Ame grow. With Yuki essentially being a wild child, and just running around, turning into a wolf, and just exploring everything in nature, with Ame being the quiet one, being the quiet mama's boy. Just watching these three interact together on screen and reading about it in the book was just pure purity at its finest. Sorry, kind of stumbled there for a second. But just the purity of the relationship, like that, is just happiness. And honestly, I needed this bit of a slice of life, fun, family time after the last few books I'd read. My brain needed a break, and despite how bitter this film ends, as well as the story, it does have a bit of a small, bitter ending. But frankly, at the same time, the message that it is sending. To all parents who have read this book or know of it, you can all agree that parenting is not easy. I know at some point whenever I become a parent, I'll realize that myself. But watching this is a fine example to me of what not to do with your kids and what to do. Like, teach them and nurture them, but do not abuse them whatsoever. Do not harm them or whatever. Anyways, I'm getting off track. But watching as they grow, not only this, but watching Yuki and Ame grow into themselves and essentially choosing their different paths. And I like how they change over time. Like, Yuki goes from being a rambunctious child and an absolute ball of energy, like an absolute wild child, into a quiet, shy girl who just wants to fit in, and she actually chooses being a human over being a wolf. Which the irony of this is the fact that when she was younger, she was proud of being a wolf. But as she grew up, she realized that she preferred to stay among humans. She wanted to carve a place out for herself in the human world. Whereas Ame was the exact opposite. He started off not really being a fan of wolves and just wanting to be a human. But over time, we see how his confidence grows and how he is drawn more to nature, and thus he chooses the path of the wolf. And watching Hana like racing after Ame, just trying to keep her family together, like trying to keep them close despite the fact that she was wanting them to grow up and make their own choices, is heartbreaking. Because the hardest thing for a parent ever is learning to let go of your child. Learning to let them go and let them leave the nest. That is the hardest thing to do. And frankly, watching that and reading it was altogether an experience in and of itself. Now, to get to the closing part of this review, I do have two things that if they were ever pursued, I would like to see. Even if only as like a one-shot or something like that. Just to at least give me more of the story, even though there was a satisfying conclusion. So if I were to have a couple of things that I would want to see more of, like maybe in the future or something that maybe Hosoda will write down like a one-shot or like a short story or something, I would honestly want to see more of the backstory of the Wolfman, as well as maybe get an idea of what he was experiencing right before his death. Like, what drove him to go into wolf form and just end up dying so soon after Ame was born? Like, what was driving him? What was he thinking? And I'd like to see more of his past too, just to see how he grew up, how he learned how to be a wolf man. Just learning more of his backstory I think would be kind of cool. And a second thing would be seeing Yuki and Ame like in the future, like seeing Yuki is like a full-grown woman, living happily in the human world, whilst Ame roams in the wild as a wolf. I would actually like to see their futures or something, like just seeing a little more of this story would absolutely make my heart happy. Just because I love this movie, it still holds a special place in my heart, both book-wise and movie-wise. It still holds a place in my heart just because it's really just a fun movie to watch, just about life. But anyways, if you all know this, you all know what score I'm going to give this. So in all honesty, I have to give Wolfchildren a solid 10 out of 10. Just because of the fact that it is a very well done, standalone story by itself, whether in book or movie form. As a matter of fact, there is also a manga format for this for those of you who are more manga readers than book readers. So whichever way you can, I highly suggest, if you have not either seen or read this story yet, I highly encourage you to do so. I wholeheartedly beg you to do so, as you will not regret it one bit. Believe me on this. And I'm honestly excited at some point to cover more anime light novels in the future, whenever I can. But this one I had to cover just because it holds a special place in my heart. And if you guys have stuck around to the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to this crazy man's ramblings. And if you did like this video, feel free to leave a like, or leave a comment down below of which anime light novel you'd like me to cover in the next review that I do. And if you did like this video, just let me know. Anyways, you guys, thank you all for listening. This is Rambling Collector, signing off. Have an awesome day.